Okay, on to the first discussion of the afternoon. Great pleasure to be joined by Lisa O'Carroll, an Irish woman who writes The Guardian and is basically. How would you describe yourself, Lisa, in terms of your expertise?
My expertise?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been at it a long time. Have been working in England since 1987, and so I've been writing for The Guardian. I wrote for The Guardian between 2000 and 2005, but I've worked for other papers as well. And 2 years ago, I was here for the first time at Other Voices, and I took the opportunity because I was writing about Irish business for The Guardian.
Yeah.
To write about the economy. And 21st of November 2010, the IMF had come in. So it was really nice to see. There was a couple of shops I went in and I interviewed some of the owners, and it's nice to see they're still there 2 years on. So congratulations to you all who are still here. So I was writing about Irish business briefly, and then I went back to London last July when the whole News of the World scandal kicked off.
And you've been covering that in depth. I mean, you've been all over that. I mean, this week we'll start with the most recent thing, which is this week's release of the Leveson Inquiry. And you've been following that. You've been following that report, that inquiry for quite some time. When the report was published this week, did any of these findings surprise you?
Yeah, I think the main finding wasn't a surprise. He had dropped enough hints during the inquiry, which I was at every day, that he was going to go for something a bit like the Irish system, which was a voluntary regulatory system organised by the newspapers but underpinned by statute. But the newspapers don't want that and are fighting and look like they have won. David Cameron within hours dismissed it. But what was really interesting was journalists were given. David Cameron got the report 24 hours before it was published in Parliament at 1:30, and the journalists were brought down to this kind of concrete bunker in Westminster and locked into a room at 11:45 ahead of the publication at 1:30, and they were, it's a monster. It's that size.
Yeah.
There are 4 volumes, and the executive summary is 44 pages. So we went down there, myself and my colleague Dan Saba, along with 100 others. From other outlets, and with our highlighters and our post-it notes, and we're struggling to find juicy, the line, and that's what was disappointing. And the following day in the morning conference in the Guardian, we were discussing it, and somebody who had covered the Macpherson report was saying, that was the thing. There was no, public inquiries generally. I'm not sure about here, the Mahon Tribunal and all that. Not so familiar with, other than they've gone on for years and years, but. As this guy said, Hugh Muir said, it was inquiries will generally they will just nudge. They won't actually be terribly critical of the politician or the political party who ordered the inquiry. And I think he was absolutely right. The Macpherson report at least delivered that institutional racism when they were talking about the police and Stephen Lawrence. There wasn't a line like that from Leveson. The best he could do when he at 1:30 got up and made his statement was to say, this was, the industry's own proposal, which included a board involving serving editors, was yet again the industry just trying to mark its own homework. Nice line, but he'd used it several times over and over in the inquiry.
Do you think it's the case that he chickened out, or do you think that basically there wasn't any sort of like stabbing great line to take out of it?
I don't think he chickened out. He was very, very conscious throughout. The inquiry went on for 9 months. And time and again, he referred back to previous inquiries into the press in Britain, the Colcott report. There were 2 of them, a royal commission over 60 years. There were several. And he said he didn't want his report to end up like the others, gathering dust on a shelf. So I think he took a gamble to, rein back on criticism, particularly of politicians, and deliver something that would be implementable.
Yeah.
And he failed because Cameron decided he's not going to implement it.
Yeah.
Everybody was, it was highly entertaining, all the texts between David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks to hear, we're in it together, let's go for a country supper, LOL, it doesn't actually mean whatever. There were moments like that were fantastic, but there was amazing. It was an amazing inquiry. Rupert Murdoch in for 2 days at 81, forced to answer questions. Never seen in public like that before, and will probably never again. Jeremy Hunt, the Culture Secretary, quizzed over the B-Sky B bid, and there was a kind of turning point in the inquiry. At that stage, there was a lot of heat around that, and there was a genuine feeling in the country that the government could be brought down, and it didn't happen. he kind of, again, Leveson.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a high court judge. He's an appeals court judge. He could become the top judge in the land. You know, everybody has an ego. He doesn't want to go down he didn't want to go down in history as the guy who brought down the government, gagged the press. So there we have it.
Yeah, you mentioned that when you went back to the UK, you started working back at the Guardian in the UK when the whole News of the World story unfolded. I mean, that story, when you're watching it, I suppose, you know, as a journalist myself, you're watching kind of like fellow members of your trade, trying to kind of like sort out the story, get a line on the story, and actually work out what's going on. Did it surprise you, the kind of, I suppose, the volume of stories that came out of the News of the World hacking situation, and did it also kind of like surprise you that Murdoch closed down the paper?
Do you mean the volume of phone hacking?
The volume of incidents that came out of it.
Well, I think, you know, before my time there, Nick Davies, the investigative journalist who uncovered it all, he had written in 2009 that it was widespread, industrial scale. The New York Times had written in 2010 exactly the same, and interviewed this guy, Sean Hoare, who sadly died, and, you know, there are active proceedings and it's contempt of court, although it's in Ireland, this could go out on YouTube, and I'm not going to end up in front of any judge. But, you know, we have to be careful what you say about phone hacking, their allegations. But I think, you know, we can go, you know, the police have said they have, from the notes of the guy who allegedly did the hacking, they've got 4,500 potential victims. They've contacted 2,500. And we've certainly, last week we published a list of 300 that we know of, that Nick Davies was either told off the record by the police or by other sources that have come out in civil litigation or have come out in the Leveson Inquiry. So, you know, it's astonishing. They range from Prince Charles, Camilla, to Millie Dowler, and those famous ones we know of. And, you know, it became a kind of running... Lots of journalists were hacked as well, and lots of PRs, and it kind of became a running joke. Well, if you haven't been hacked, you're a nobody. And yes, please tell me I'm in hack, because I'll get at least 10 grand. And in News International, you don't even have to go to court. So...
But when Murdoch closed down the News of the World, I mean, when he made that grand big gesture, you know, I think most people saw it as a gesture. Most people assumed he'd be back out with the Sun on Sunday pretty fast.
Well, he was, wasn't he? I mean, it was political. He couldn't have opened the Sun on Sunday the week later. He bided his time, but it was out in March, I think it started.
Yeah. But like it was at the same time, like it was a big, it was like a gesture by him. You know, it's a paper that like he'd been involved in so long, paper he loved. He just kind of okay.
I don't know if he loved the News of the World. He loved the Sun. He loves the Sun, and in the Inquiry, and even before that, you would know anecdotally. You know, he would phone the Sun every day. He would get the splash of the Sun faxed over to his office in New York every day. You'd never hear stories like that about the News of the World. Yeah. And he told the Inquiry that, you know, if you want to read my opinion, you don't have to seek a meeting with me. You just read the Sun, read the leader in the Sun, or you listen to Trevor Kavanagh, his political columnist. Yeah.
You mentioned one person earlier on who kind of, I suppose, very much came to the fore in the last year, which is Rebecca Brooks, and the way, you know, she became central to everything, be it like the Cameron liaisons, be it like, I mean, she was at Murdoch's side so much. You know, what's your take on her? I mean, do you see her as a canny media operator, or do you see her as someone who's a bit over depth?
Right now?
Yeah.
Right now she's counting her 7 million and wondering what she's going to be doing for the next 2 years, isn't she? I mean, she's facing trial next September, criminal trial. She'll be back in court in December, along with a few others. In a sort of interim hearing. She was an exceptional networker. I mean, I know her, I've met her, I've dealt with her. I worked at News International for a while. I think there was a general feeling that she had been over-promoted, that she wasn't a chief executive. She wasn't chief executive material. Yeah. But you know, you have to have worked in that environment in the tabloids to see how things were condoned, and there was a culture. And you know, the NUJ went into the Inquiry and talked about bullying. I don't think Leveson found that there was bullying, but there is bullying in newsrooms. It's a terribly, terribly competitive environment. Lots of people want to be journalists. So you've not only got to beat your own, your rival newspaper, you've got to beat the rival journalists in your newsroom. If you're on a Sunday paper and it's a tabloid, I mean, the competition to get a story even into the paper, never mind the front page or the spread inside, is enormous. So people do things, and there are lots and lots of instances of people doing things, and she was one of them. She hid in a cupboard when Piers Morgan was the News of the World editor, and he told her to hide in a cupboard of the Sunday Times because they had some. I can't remember what book it was that was
Some
coming out.
Spanish.
Which was it?
I can't remember.
Prince
Charles?
Well, whatever, it was
Yeah.
a royal
Yeah.
whatever scandal, and they had the book serialization, and she nicked it for the news of the world.
I find
and I think Murdoch said, "Well done."
Yeah, but I find one thing I really find interesting, Lisa, about like I suppose a lot of the figures that came out of the last year of inquiries is people like Piers Morgan, people like Andy Coulson, people like what's his name, Dominic, the editor of the Sun Demon, what's his name?
Dominic Mohan.
Donald, yeah, exactly. They've all come from a showbiz beat. They all they all cut their teeth as showbiz hacks. Like hanging out at parties,
Yeah,
hanging
you
out
can
with
draw a
celebrities.
direct line down from
Yeah.
Kelvin McKenzie right down to.
Yeah. It always kind of struck me that maybe what dirty tricks they picked up in the showbiz desks that they managed to import onto the politics desks, learning about like hacking phones, learning about things like that.
Well, there's no evidence of hacking anywhere other
it's
than
like
News of the World.
alleged hacking.
There's no evidence, really. There isn't. But blagging, I think, probably was quite blagging of information. That's all, on the record. Operation Motorman, people ringing up pretending they're, people who are, they call them search agents now, or private detectives, ringing up, getting criminal records, getting matching if you're having an affair and this person you're having the affair with is being followed on a scooter by a photographer. They'll get the number plate, and then they'll be able to match the number plate to the owner, so they'll be able to identify who it was. That's happened. And that's all well known about.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. I've worked on the Evening Standard, and I worked on the Daily Mail, and I worked on the Daily Mirror. It wasn't. I think the thing with the news of the world, it had just got out of control, really. And I think there's, even, the phone hacking victims are very angry with Cameron. Jerry McCann saying yes last night that we've all been duped, and it was actually useless going to give evidence and rehearsing all the terrible things that happened to him. But I do think there's something great has come out of the inquiry, is that there is the industry is very, very chastened.
Yeah.
People won't dare do anything that is slightly over the line, which has a negative impact as well on investigative journalism, because there are things you can do in the public interest.
Yeah.
And I think people are terribly nervous about the law as well. But lots of people didn't know that they could be tried under a law from 1906. It wasn't in the journalism book. So, yeah.
Do you think everyone's going to toe the line, though, Lisa? I mean, you say there like that we're the media as a trade are chasing them right now. We're looking at what came out. We're looking at the public turning against journalists as well. Do you think we're all going to hold the line, or will at some stage, as has always been the case in the past, someone is going to go, I need that story. It involves me doing something a little bit sneaky, a little bit more than blagging, and we're going back to square one again.
Oh, I definitely think we want people to do that, don't we? Absolutely, we want journalists to do that. Even Brian Leveson said you need a raucous, you need a provocative, you need newspapers to entertain. We were joking, would anybody dare try and get a leak of the Leveson Inquiry? And think, well, the Sun won't dare do that. But yeah, please, let's hope somebody does. And wouldn't it be great if they did? There's a difference between breaking the law and doing something really immoral, isn't there?
Yeah.
And breaking the law and do it in the public interest. If you wanted to expose, for example, hacking, if there was a public interest offence for hacking, and you didn't go on a fishing expedition listening to people's voicemails, but you were very convinced and you had other corroborative evidence that Jimmy Savile, were he alive, was a paedophile, there would be a public interest offence if there was one in law, but there isn't, for phone hacking. Yeah. So, in the same with, the laws in Britain, there's the Computer Misuse Act, there's Data Protection Act. Some of them have public interest offences and some don't. Yeah.
When we were having back and forth emails about this panel, there's one thing you kind of sent me through. It was kind of a thought on that. I read out the quote because it's really good. You said that about the new media barons on Twitter and social media. You mentioned the difficulty squaring the internet circle. You can regulate print, but how can you regulate Twitter, Facebook? Lots of law in the UK and possibly Ireland, but essentially apart from a very few high-profile cases involving some stupid people, it's wide open. Everyday serious libel. There's 3 series there. Serious libel is being committed by people who are not trained journalists who think it's okay to call someone a paedophile.
Be careful what you write in email, right?
But when I was going through this, that's a really interesting point. Did any of that come out in the wash?
But that was at the time of McAlpine when it was
alleged.
McAlpine came out and he's not a paedophile.
Yeah.
There was a mistake made by Newsnight, but there were several high-profile people, including the Guardian's George Monbiot, who had referred to McAlpine and had named him in in a tweet. No, it didn't come out in the inquiry. The level of interrogation of Google on Twitter was appalling in the inquiry. I mean, but the barristers, there were two youngish ones. There's one, Robert J, is 51. They're not people who are there tweeting every day. They're not, the journalistic fraternity is tweeting every day a lot.
Yeah.
And, there's a new phrase called Twitteria. I think I have it myself. But they didn't grasp the nettle, and there's very, very little in the Leveson Inquiry. He ducked it. He just said it's difficult. It's impossible.
But those thoughts you were kind of expressing in the email, but the fact that it's this great Wild West online, things have been said by people who haven't a clue what they're on about. And as we saw with McAlpine, he took some action against the more high-profile people who repeated that allegation. Do you think, where do you see that kind of going? Do you see...
Well, there are criminal laws, aren't there, that are being, looked at. And, there were those, I think it was 9 people who were fined for naming... the girl who had been raped by Ched Evans. Do you remember that?
That case, yeah.
And then there was the guy who, but the charges, they didn't go ahead and charge him, who had said something else about the diver, Tom Daly.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been, there've been at least a dozen cases where the police have got involved. But I don't think there's been anything there hasn't been as strong a message as McAlpine saying, I'm going to sue and I'm going to look for a lot of money. I mean, there's a rumour going around that Sally Burko, he's looking for 40 grand off her. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. You mentioned there about in passing Jimmy Savile and the BBC. I mean, it's been a horrific year for the BBC on every single score. How do you think the corporation is going to face into 2013? I mean, is the new DG the man to clean things up there, or is it going to be another period of, I suppose, accusation, attacks, and more mistakes being made?
Yeah, no, it has been an amazing year. 3 DGs in a year. George Entwistle was just the wrong man for the job.
He looked like Rafael Benitez. He reminded me of Rafael Benitez. You look at that guy, kind of, that guy's gone.
Yeah.
By the way, West Ham bet Chelsea 3-1 today. So.
Who do you support?
Liverpool. It has been an extraordinary year.
No, I think Tony Hall is very well respected. He was the ex-head of news in the 90s. Very serious man. But he lost out on 2 occasions before. So the question is, well, if he wasn't the right man for the job this time round, because he was asked about it before George Entwistle was appointed, and the previous time he lost out to Greg Dyke, why is he the right man now? I mean, I think the great thing, there was a great story during the last few weeks about Greg Dyke, who had come from London Weekend Television and ITV, and he was a kind of street fighter, a commercial guy, went into the BBC, lost his job over the sex stuff dossier. But he apparently had gone into the BBC and called the top 150 managers together and said, the first thing I want you all to do is leave the BBC. And he was genuinely serious about that, because he felt that there were people in there go in and they stay for life. And that's probably the same in RTE.
Yeah.
And lots of other places, that it's really good to go out there and get experience in the commercial world. So Tony Hall, it's not commercial, but he did leave, and he went to the Royal Opera House, which was in a terrible financial state at the time, and he's been there for 10 years and has turned it around. I think I think he would definitely steady the ship. And who knows? I mean, I don't think we're going to see anything too... the BBC would probably be risk averse for 1-2 years.
Yeah, and which is bad news in a way as well.
Well, I don't know. I mean, things go in cycles, don't they?
Yeah, but just kind of I suppose, kind of tease out a bit that risk averse thing. I mean, some of the stories that Newsnight kind of got wrapped up and got their knuckles wrapped over. Do you think that was down to a lack of resources, a lack of training?
Well, the McAlpine thing was just bad. As I said, it was bad journalism. You're letting somebody's a paedophile. It's probably one of the worst things you can call somebody. And you don't call the guy and say, we're going to call you a paedophile, what do you think? And you don't put a photograph of the guy who says this happened, whatever, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago probably, to the victim. So, I mean, that was just bad journalism. Yeah. And unfortunately happened at a bad time as well, following the Savile stuff. But they handled that really badly. They just handled the Savile. It was just, how not to do crisis management.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say that one of the weaknesses of the BBC was that when George Entwistle came in, and before that there was a Deputy Director General who nobody really knew what he did, but now they understand what he did was stop all this stuff. His name was Mark Byford. So, the structure of the BBC had been weakened at the top. when George Entwistle arrived, and then when he arrived, he got rid of some of the old guard, and they went immediately.
Yeah.
So the structures had been weakened significantly to allow that Newsnight thing to happen.
Yeah. Have you been following, what's been going on at RTE in the wake of, say, the Further Reynolds case, in the wake of the allegations of groupthink and things like that? And what's your take on it as someone who's been following the media trade in the UK, looking at what's happening in RTE?
Well, wasn't it interesting that the Director General of the BBC fell on his sword? That didn't happen at the RTE.
Lisa, you're too long out of the country. We don't do resignations here.
Yeah. But they had Tony Mulhall left. Ed Mulhall, sorry.
Yeah, and Aoife Kavanagh as well.
Yeah, so, the journalist and the head of news left, but the Director General didn't. The chairman didn't. I mean, that's a problem in a small country, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
It's interesting as well, but with RTE in that score as well, that they've brought in a new head of news and current affairs to tie things up there. But like you say, the top tier of management is still in place.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with it.
Okay.
To make any comparison with the BBC.
Yeah,
but I think it's a small country. There's one main broadcasting outlet. TV3 lost its head, didn't it? Because
Ben Frew went back to UK.
Yeah, and he said he had an appalling 2 years trying to compete with RTE.
Well, he in 2 years he produced Telefornication, he produced Real Housewives of South County Dublin. He produced some awful. He produced some programs which a TV snob like me would call awful, but I think they were rating successes.
No, but he was talking about trying to compete with the state broadcaster and the state broadcaster being protected by the state.
Yeah.
In terms of, the licence fee and his guaranteed income.
Yeah. Let's go back, Lisa, to where we came in with the Leveson Inquiry, and you're kind of saying, you kind of said that papers will be a little bit risk averse and they'll toe the line a little bit. What do you think will be the long-term ramifications of Leveson? Will it be another report gathering dust on the shelf, or will something come out of that will change the media landscape overall? Well,
I think what you got to look at is what is coming out of the newspaper itself has changed. The newspaper industry in England has changed its view as a whole in the last week. I mean, the Guardian, the FT, and the Russian guy who owns the Independent all refused to sign a letter backing a model, which was largely a model proposed by the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, the right-wing press. Now, they were looking for PCC, son of PCC, where you had serving editors on the board. And Leveson, specifically said no serving editors.
Yeah.
And I think the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph have now accepted that that's not the case, that they can't go forward with that. But it kind of depressed me this morning reading the Daily Mail, where you've got Paul Dacre, who rarely, comes out, it comes out in daylight. We saw him twice at the Leveson Inquiry, 3 times at the Leveson Inquiry, but you rarely see his name in his own paper. He's kind of a very, very, he is one of the most powerful figures in British newspaper history. But his leader today was talking about the grubby Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband. He just can't stop himself. And one of the news stories they were doing, there's a newspaper meeting with the culture secretary on Tuesday, and then the newspaper industry is holding another one on Wednesday, because there's a rush on to get this alternative PCC up and running by, the model complete by the end of January. So he announces in his own page the editors committee, as if the public know what the hell the editors committee, or committee code of ethics, whatever it is, has called a meeting. It's like Paul Dacre has called a meeting. I think if we have a regulator which is totally independent of the powerful figures in Fleet Street, whoever they are, whether they were the Guardian or the Mail, the FT, the Sun, whoever they are, it needs to be independent, and it wasn't ever before. Yeah,
one area we haven't touched on, and I suppose it's kind of like it's one of those areas that every single time I've done a media banter or involved in any sort of media discussion, always comes up about the future of newspapers, the future where media is going, the online side, and you look at, I suppose, going back over the last 12 months, watching certain highlights, watching how the Daily Mail site has become bigger and bigger and bigger, watching how inevitably we're moving to a situation where every print newspaper at some stage in the next 10 years is going to press the off button and move online only. What are your, just kind of, I suppose, some kind of thoughts off the top of your head on that? Where do you see it? Would you be as pessimistic as I am and kind of thinking 5 to 10 years from now, print newspapers as we know will be gone? Do you think, what online stories this year have impressed you? What online moves have impressed you this year?
Newspapers will definitely be gone, but when they're gone, I don't know. I mean, Murdoch said, who's got the biggest selling, he said 5, 10, 20 years. I don't know if 20 years' time there'll be any print newspapers, but they'll exist online. It's just, the brand will exist and the culture of the paper will continue to exist online if you're lucky. I mean, the Daily Mirror will struggle, I think, to survive. The Independent is already struggling to survive. And the Guardian has a huge presence. The Daily Mail has a phenomenal presence, but it's quite different to the newspaper.
As you mentioned there, for example, the Russian billionaire guy who now owns the Independent. You know, is he someone to watch for the future?
Well, he's trying to get somebody to give him a bit of a bailout of the Independent. Apparently, you know, I think they said they lost 60 million. I mean, newspapers are very expensive to run. The Guardian's not in good financial shape. The Daily Mail doesn't make money online. You know, they don't make a profit online. They pull in some money. So nobody's cracked that yet. So there's still a big divide on, you know, a paywall or no paywall. And I think that's where the hot topic or the hot zone is.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Excellent.